Have you ever been left by someone and felt like your world was ending, only to realize months or years later that their departure was the best thing that ever happened to you? You probably called it abandonment. You felt rejected, unwanted, maybe even worthless. But what if I told you that Carl Jung saw something entirely different in these moments? What if what you experienced wasn't abandonment at all, but liberation? Let's get brutally honest about the psychology of being left behind. Most people experience abandonment as a wound. The person they loved, needed, or depended on simply vanished. Maybe they ghosted you. Maybe they found someone else. Maybe they just grew tired of the dynamic and walked away without explanation. You were left to pick up the pieces, wondering what was wrong with you, what you could have done differently. But Jung had a radically different perspective. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And sometimes, becoming who you truly are requires other people to get out of the way. Every person who leaves your life removes a role, a dynamic, a version of yourself that was never really you to begin with. They don't abandon you. They abandon the false version of you that you created to keep them around." Think about your most painful abandonment. Were you really being yourself in that relationship? Or were you performing, adapting, shrinking to fit what they needed? Jung called this psychological contamination, when we lose ourselves in another person's psychic field. Jung observed, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But not all transformations are growth. Sometimes we transform into smaller, more acceptable versions of ourselves. When someone leaves that dynamic, they're not leaving you, they're leaving the diminished version you became. This is where Jung's concept of individuation becomes revolutionary. Individuation is the process of becoming a whole, integrated person, not just the sum of your relationships, roles, and external validations. Jung wrote, "The individual has always been an integer, and we are not the first to discover it. But we are the first to make it a living reality for the masses." Every abandonment is an invitation to individuation. When someone leaves, they strip away the external structure you use to define yourself. Suddenly, you're forced to confront the question, who am I when I'm not needed, wanted, or chosen by this person? This is terrifying, but it's also liberating. Jung understood that many relationships are based on psychological projection. He wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. We project our unlived potential, our need for completion, our fear of being alone. When you feel abandoned, ask yourself, was this person fulfilling you or filling a void you were afraid to face?" Jung believed that we often mistake dependency for love, need for connection, and fear of solitude for genuine intimacy. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Some people leave because they sense your dependency, and dependency repels authentic connection. When you need someone to feel whole, you're offering them your emptiness, not your fullness. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. When you can't accept yourself completely, you ask others to do it for you. And that's an impossible burden. Think about relationships that ended with you feeling abandoned. How much of your identity was wrapped up in being chosen by that person? When they left, did you lose a person, or did you lose your entire sense of self?" This is what Jung meant. Loneliness does not come from having no people about one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself. The deepest abandonment isn't when someone leaves, it's when you abandon yourself to keep someone else around. Jung observed that people are terrified of solitude because it forces them to confront their own shadow, the rejected, denied, or undeveloped parts of themselves. He wrote, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." When someone abandons you, they force you to look inside. Suddenly, you're alone with yourself, perhaps for the first time in years. This is when the real work begins. Jung believed individuation required the dark night of the soul, periods of isolation and confrontation with your own psyche. He wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. But this pain isn't punishment, it's labor. You're giving birth to who you were always meant to be. Every person who leaves removes a layer of false identity. The person who couldn't handle your intensity taught you that intensity is your power, not a flaw. The person who left when you set boundaries taught you that boundaries attract the right people. The person who chose someone else taught you that being authentic matters more than being chosen." Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But everything that abandons us can lead us to an understanding of our own completeness." Here's what Jung discovered. The people who leave often take the parts of yourself that were never really you. The people-pleasing version that exhausted itself trying to be perfect. The anxious version that monitored every word and reaction. The small version that dimmed its light to avoid threatening their ego. When they leave, these false selves die. The death feels like abandonment because you mistake these roles for your identity. But Jung would say, "You're being liberated from a prison you built to house someone else's expectations." This is why the most painful abandonments often become the most transformative experiences of your life. Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Every ending forces you to choose. Will you collapse into victimhood, or will you rise into individuation? The dark psychology of abandonment reveals something profound. We often attract people who will eventually leave because we unconsciously know we need to be forced into our own completeness. Jung called this the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to create growth-forcing situations, even painful ones. Your soul knows you can't individuate while psychologically merged with another person. You can't discover your strength while depending on someone else's presence. You can't find your voice while saying what others want to hear. So sometimes, the psyche orchestrates abandonment, not as punishment, but as liberation. Jung observed, the psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. Your abandonment wounds aren't accidents. They're your psyche forcing you to confront avoided parts of yourself. Every person who walked away took a piece of your false identity and left space for your authentic self to emerge. Here's the paradox Jung understood. People who leave often refuse to enable your self-abandonment. Some ghost you because they sense dependency and know staying would reinforce your pattern of losing yourself. Some choose others because they recognize you're not choosing yourself. Some grow distant because desperation repels connection. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. You can't become who you truly are while being who someone else needs you to be." The people who stay after you've individuated were attracted to your authenticity, not your availability. They chose your wholeness, not your willingness to abandon yourself. Jung believed healthy relationships exist between two individuated people, complete on their own, choosing to share that completeness rather than fill internal voids. He wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But the transformation should make you more yourself, not less." When you look back at your abandonments, see them as graduations. Each person who left graduated you from self-abandonment you had outgrown. Jung understood that individuation is lonely, but loneliness and aloneness aren't the same. Loneliness is disconnection from others. Aloneness is connection with yourself. He wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people about one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself. When you individuate, you learn to communicate the most important things to the most important person, yourself. People who left couldn't handle your authenticity, your growth, your refusal to remain small. But their departure was your liberation. They freed you from exhausting work of being someone you're not. They freed you from relationships requiring self-abandonment as admission price. They freed you to discover connection when bringing your whole self. Jung observed, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. Accept that some people were never meant to stay. Accept that some relationships were designed to end. Accept that your abandonment wounds were liberation wounds in disguise. The next time someone leaves your life, instead of asking, 'What's wrong with me?' ask, 'What part of me is being freed?' Instead of mourning the relationship, celebrate the return to yourself. Instead of fearing abandonment, recognize liberation." Jung's final insight on this matter was profound. The individual has always been an integer, and we are not the first to discover it. You were whole before they arrived. You remained whole while they were there. You are whole now that they're gone. Their presence didn't complete you, and their absence doesn't diminish you. You weren't abandoned. You were liberated. Liberated from the prison of needing external validation. Liberated from the exhaustion of performing for love. Liberated from the fear that you're not enough on your own. Every person who walks away teaches you the same lesson. You don't need anyone to choose you for you to be worthy of love. You don't need anyone to stay for you to be complete. You don't need anyone's presence to validate your existence. Jung wrote, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." Every abandonment is an invitation to look into your own heart and discover the completeness that was always there. But let's dig deeper into why this liberation feels like death. When someone leaves, your nervous system responds as if your survival is threatened. As children, abandonment was a survival threat. So when someone leaves us as adults, our primitive brain screams, "You're going to die." Jung understood this terror is often misplaced. He wrote, "The child in man is always trying to do something that the adult in him would never allow." The child panics because it believes you need them to survive. But the individuated adult knows you survived before they came. and you'll thrive after they're gone. Here's what Jung discovered about the difference between attachment and love. Attachment says, "I need you to be here so I can feel okay." Love says, "I want you to be here, but I'm okay either way." When someone leaves an attachment-based relationship, it feels like abandonment because your sense of self was dependent on their presence. When someone leaves a love-based relationship, it feels like loss, but your sense of self remains intact. Jung wrote, "Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, love is lacking." Most relationships that end in feelings of abandonment were power struggles disguised as love. When the control fails, you're left facing Jung's truth. You can't love someone into staying. This is Jung's most radical insight. The people who leave often do you the greatest spiritual favor. They refuse to participate in the illusion that you need them to be whole. They decline to enable your self-abandonment. If someone stayed despite your dependency, what would you learn? You'd learn that neediness works. You'd never learn to stand on your own. But when they leave, they force you to confront. Who are you when no one is watching? Who are you when you have only yourself? Jung called this the encounter with the self, your essential nature, your core being, your soul's blueprint. Most people avoid this encounter because it requires letting go of external validation. But abandonment forces it. When everyone else leaves, you're finally alone with the person you've been running from, yourself. And Jung knew that person isn't the enemy. They're the answer. Jung observed that successfully individuated people often described their periods of abandonment as the most important times of their lives. The pain forced them to dig deeper, find inner resources, and develop a relationship with their psyche that no external relationship could replace. Sometimes, people who abandon you are responding to your own unconscious desire to be free. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Consciously, you might want them to stay, but unconsciously, you might create conditions for them to leave, because part of you knows you need liberation. Your unconscious orchestrates the ending because it knows this relationship keeps you small. Jung called this compensation, the psyche's self-balancing ability. Your abandonment isn't punishment. It's your psyche saying, "You're ready for something bigger. Stop hiding behind this relationship and live as your full self." Jung believed people who abandon us often represent unintegrated aspects of ourselves. When they leave, you're forced to reclaim projected parts of yourself. You can no longer blame them or use them as excuses. This forces you to take back your power. Jung wrote, "The most intense conflicts, if overcome, leave behind a sense of security and calm that is not easily disturbed." Every abandonment you survive makes you more unshakable. Eventually, you reach psychological maturity, where you can love freely because you don't need love to survive. This is ultimate liberation, when abandonment becomes impossible because you never abandon yourself. Your center isn't located in another person, it's in you. Jung's final teaching, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But you can't become authentic while trying to keep someone else around. You can't discover yourself while performing for an audience. Every person who leaves gives you back the gift of yourself. They're freeing you to be chosen for who you actually are. not who you pretend to be. If you've been avoiding the pain of past abandonments, it's time to reframe them. If you're afraid of being left again, it's time to fall in love with your own company. If you're still waiting for someone to come back and complete you, it's time to realize that you were never incomplete to begin with. The people who left freed you to find the people who will love your wholeness, not your neediness. They freed you to build relationships based on choice, not dependency. They freed you to become the person you were always meant to be. This is Jung's radical reframe. Every abandonment is an act of love from your own psyche. Your soul orchestrates endings to force beginnings. Your unconscious creates departures to force arrivals into your own authenticity. So thank them for leaving. Thank them for refusing to enable your self-abandonment. Thank them for forcing you to confront your own completeness. Thank them for graduating you from the school of codependency into the university of individuation. You weren't abandoned, you were liberated. And now you're free to build relationships worthy of the whole person you've become. If this perspective on abandonment and individuation resonates with you, subscribe for more insights into Jung's revolutionary psychology. Share your story in the comments. Which abandonment in your life turned out to be your greatest liberation? And remember, every ending is a beginning, every departure is an arrival, and every abandonment is an invitation to come home to yourself. The people who are meant to stay in your individuated life will recognize and celebrate the person you've become. The rest were just clearing the path.